Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silvermont, and this is a quick look at Sinner: Sacrifice for Redemption, a candidate for 2018's most generic titled video game. But hey, let's be fair, Dark Souls was a little eye-rolling at first too. I received an early access copy of this game, but otherwise, no compensation. But what is Sinner? From what I understand, it is a boss-focused action game, which has certainly taken more than one cue from Dark Souls. The game's visual aesthetic is almost like a hyper-deformed or chibi Dark Souls in that sense. I think there is actually some potential there, but I don't like how obtuse and wordy the boss introductions are. It smacks of a 15-year-old's edgy writing, you know? And having once been a 15-year-old who wrote an edgy fantasy novel, I would know all about that. Honestly, watching this video will give you a great idea of what sort of game this is on a basic level. On that note, I don't know if there are levels between the bosses, or if you simply go from one boss to the other. Imagine Demon's Souls, the Nexus hub, but you cut out everything apart from the Archdemon Archstones. That's how it works in Sinner. You're in a small hub, you press a stone, and then you fight the boss. Maybe in the final game there are levels in between, but I don't know. But I'll touch on what I enjoyed about this quick look at the game before going into what I didn't enjoy, things that either aren't for me or just really need improving. That said, I'm not very good at this game. I've only played it a little bit, so don't judge the game based on my poor performance at it. First up, the game's style, as mentioned. I kind of enjoy the way it looks. Perhaps it's a little close to Dark Souls, but it is identifiable as being different, and I enjoy the exaggerated proportions, although I would like to see some more variety in the locales and colours. Maybe that'll be in the final product. I don't know, I can only judge what I'm seeing here. The game's animations and sense of momentum feel good enough, and there's some flair with the attacks. The bosses seem to be the strong focus here, and whilst the first was somewhat generic, the second felt like it could be a fun Dark Souls or Bloodborne boss in terms of the design, although it was perhaps a little bit extra. I think the core principles and design are there, and this game could have some potential. You have light attack, heavy attack, charged heavy attack, running attacks, and you can block and I think parry, but I don't know how that works exactly. And in this version, several items you can use. Bombs, throwing spears, a flame coating for your sword that also drains your health, I suppose you could liken it to Power Within, and some health potions. If you have played Dark Souls, you will feel fairly comfortable with how this game feels to control, as it's quite similar in how you would select items and weapons in Dark Souls. And in this version there are two weapons, a sword and shield and like a greatsword. I would assume there's going to be more weapons in the final game, however. But now to touch on the more negative aspects. This seems like a game that is just constantly punishing the player. Now I know some people like that, but it isn't for me. Right off the bat when you start this version, you are forced to sacrifice a portion of your health and stamina before you can even do anything, or look at the boss. Okay, I guess that's where the sacrifice for redemption part comes from, but why though? Maybe there's an in-game story reason, but purely from a player's perspective, it feels pretentious. Why even give me a full health bar if you're then going to make me lose a chunk of it? And it doesn't just shrink, it's constantly there taunting me as if I've constantly lost some of my health, as opposed to the health bar just shrinking in its overall size, which would be, I don't know, that would feel less annoying for some reason. Then after you defeat the boss, you have the option of getting it back, the health and stamina, but then you lose the extra health you ostensibly received from defeating the boss. So it's like, what? Maybe the idea is that you balance this risk-reward factor with the bonuses you get from each boss. So maybe you lose some health for beating the boss, like you lose some total health, but maybe you gain extra damage? Maybe that is the idea they're going for, but it's not really made clear right now. Maybe I'm a little bit more traditional in the sense of as I play a game and I get better at it, I want my character to become stronger, not weaker. That's a fairly subjective complaint. I know, it's just a personal one, but these next two, well. This is an early access version of the game, so I really hope they fix this by release. But in this current build, there is almost constant, I don't even know what to call it, micro-stuttering, micro-hitching upon certain animations or attacks in the game. Almost as if the game has to pause for a microsecond whilst it loads in. Now, a strange, weird comparison, but if you've ever played Dark Souls on PC and swapped a lot of textures out, like if you've installed texture mods, you'll notice that when those textures load in, they freeze the game for like a split second. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about here. I don't know whether it's particle effects or what it is, but it's really annoying. This is the PC version of the game, I should point out. It's also coming out on consoles. And as a slight aside, the resolution support wasn't working for me and I was forced to play the game windowed, as it turned all blurry in full screen. I can speculate the reason for this being is that my monitor is 1440p resolution, but I do have Windows scaling on for the desktop. It cannot be exaggerated enough, however, how frustrating the micro-stuttering mini-lag is in a game like this. To have split-second pauses now and then when you're trying to avoid like 20 attacks at the same second. Imagine if you were playing Ikaruga or like a shoot 'em up and that happened. Imagine if you're trying to parry something in Dark Souls whilst the game is constantly hitching. You just can't. The second issue is the camera. Oh goodness. As you might be seeing in this video, not only do parts of the terrain often block the camera entirely, but the game uses a horrible fixed camera angle focus, like something from the early 2000s. There is a reason that Devil May Cry moved away from fixed camera angles. It was bad for an action game. And I'm not talking about a lock-on, I'm talking about you have no real control over the camera. What does this mean? Well, the first boss has a part where he spawns tiny men who start casting a spell that will kill you. So you need to run around and defeat them before they finish casting it, but the camera is focused on the boss constantly. The game has a lock-on, but so far as I'm aware that's only for the facing of your character, so you can lock onto the boss or the enemies, but the actual camera itself is always locked on the boss, so far as I can see. If there's no way to disable that, that is a huge oversight in an action game, and perhaps the most frustrating part of this one. If they change the camera and fix the mini lag, I might well be on board. The little pauses don't seem like they'd be hard to fix, as it's probably just some sort of optimization with loading or something, but I'm concerned about the camera issues. I don't think they're going to change that. And when I start dying in a game because the camera automatically moved in such a way that a pillar was blocking everything that I needed to see, I wonder why I'm playing that game, because I don't play games to get frustrated at things I have no real control over, you know? Finally, back to a more subjective issue. The bosses sometimes felt a little obnoxious to me. The first one, for example, he shoots a dozen projectiles. He spawns poison-spewing enemies, like 2 different varieties. He spawns spellcasting enemies that will insta-kill you if they get their spell done. And he poisons you if you get close to him. It feels A, too busy, and B, if your first boss in a game is one that poisons you when you get close, that is my #1 most hated mechanic of all bosses. Now, it is very possible there is a way to stop his poison aura, but if you pull a Smelter Demon on me, I'm like to play a different game that doesn't punish me for playing the game as intended. Maybe he's like, what's that thing called, Teostra? So where you can get a special skill that disables the fire damage from being close to him. So yes, maybe there are ways to get around that, but if there aren't, that's just a boss mechanic that I absolutely hate. The second boss again starts having a million mechanics and it just feels like chaos. I can understand that if you have a game focused around 7 or so bosses, you want each one to really feel momentous and have a lot to deal with, but that's just not really what I'm into. Part of me appreciates it, but part of me hates it. Does that make sense? I like the design of the boss, but I'm very particular about boss battles. I enjoy when a boss feels natural, like a creature fighting for its life, or like an honourable duel with a rival or something, you know? Not when it really feels like a designed entity, where I can practically hear the designers going, what if they had this for when the player is close, and then when the player is far, they do this, and if the player hides behind terrain, they just start shooting laser beams everywhere. And that's what I get quite a lot of from this game. It almost feels like a bunch of people got around and started fusing as many boss mechanics into one encounter as they possibly could. You can compare with, say, Dark Souls 1 bosses and Dark Souls 3 bosses. Dark Souls 1 bosses are all really simple if you think about it, and Dark Souls 3 made them a little bit more complex. It introduced more boss phases, more boss mechanics, and usually that is a good thing, but there are times when you can go a bit overboard. I kind of dread seeing what the final boss in this game is going to be like mechanically. I get the feeling this game was designed to be a, you know, super extreme hardcore game, and if that is your thing, then you might be all about Sinner: Sacrifice for Redemption, which comes out April 25th for Xbox, PS4 and PC. As for me, if the game is optimized properly on launch so I can play it, you know, full screen and remove the weird micro lag, I'd like to play more of it and see what the other bosses are like. So I can give it a recommendation, but a slightly hesitant one.